One of the things that was always a challenge for me at ThinkMojo, at other companies, including Tubular, is a lack of understanding. We all use videos, we all use resources, but are we really leveraging them?
Hey folks, this is Joe Rule with the Bold Visions podcast, where I interview marketers and creatives about how to tell better stories about tech. As always, show notes and links for this episode can be found at raconteuranimation.com/podcast. Today on the show, I spoke with Joel Goobich, an expert in video marketing, entrepreneurship, and executive management. With a career that spans more than 35 years, he's started multiple businesses, held executive management positions, and advised startups, SMBs, enterprise level, and international companies. Along this journey, he's worn almost every hat in the businessman's closet: operations, marketing, business development, sales, product development, financial accounting, you name it, he's probably been involved with it. In particular, I took an interest in Joel's experience as the head of marketing at ThinkMojo, which is a leading video marketing agency. He helped them scale a lot in their early days. So this and other experiences have given Joel some really unique insights into the value of video for marketing, including some interesting, quote, hot takes. A few of my personal highlights from the show are him talking about hyperleverage, his business growth philosophy, and he's also written a book on that. How quality doesn't matter for ROI on video marketing. And I'm talking visual quality here. Where the kind of rubber meets the road as far as getting a return is in the implementation of those video assets, not necessarily in the visual quality. And he also talks about things to help with sort of, quote, fluffy KPIs on video marketing and dealing with really long time horizons for seeing a return on those kinds of business investments. So thanks so much for tuning in to listen, and I hope you enjoy this episode on video marketing and so much more with Joel Goobich.
We all use resources, but are we really leveraging them? Are we doing it? Are we using these tools because it's the new and the greatest and we're just following the trends? Or are we really understanding as business people how we can leverage all these new tools that come out, including AI? So video is definitely one that I know of because I've been in that world. And I would have to say that unfortunately, the 7 or 8 years since I really got into it, about 2014, so close to 10 years, not a whole lot has changed in my perspective from a business to business marketing point of view in terms of the use of video marketing. Yeah, there's been improvement on the edges in terms of technology, but not necessarily in terms of how business owners, marketers really understand how to use the tools and how to get other people on the team. It's always off on the side there. So that's something I wouldn't mind talking about.
Awesome.
The other thing, it's I spent a whole year writing, a book, my book on hyperleverage, which is, the concept of proaction, of taking action to create the leverage that you might need down the road. And we do that in our personal lives to some degree. We don't do that as much as we should in our careers or as business people. We tend to react to things rather than be proactive. And so that's another thing, that, I wouldn't mind touching on, but I've had a pretty wide-ranging career. So, like I said, we could touch on a lot of different areas.
Well, I think, the video marketing, the leverage, the application part of that is a big, if I had to put a headline on the show, on this episode, that's what it would be. So for hyper leverage, what's the framing for that? Like, you're talking about being proactive, planning for the future, but in what kind of contexts?
Well, it's in the context, I wrote this really with a business. It sort of encapsulated a lot of my business philosophies from, my career, things that I've read, learned, thought about. And the perspective, it's really about not letting things happen to your business rather than you be in charge, or at least put yourself in a position to be successful. You can't not win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. So the same thing a lot of times in business, you have to sometimes think outside the box, but you also have to look at things differently. And I talk in the book about taking things apart in order to put them back together. I call it almost like a leverage prism. So if you can imagine a prism, light goes through a prism, white light, and it breaks it into a rainbow of colors. So if you take a prism on your business or on an idea or a problem, you've got a certain mindset. That's that white light that comes in. But if you break it now into its individual components, you can start to see the problem or the issue and how it's made up. So a lot of people think they may have a problem with an employee. But if you look at it differently, it may not be the employee. It could be that the work conditions are impossible for that employee or maybe any employee to be successful at. But if you only looked at it as a single type of viewpoint, you wouldn't be able to necessarily to see, hey, you know what, the motor is too weak for the employee to do X, Y, and Z. There's not enough lighting. The supply chain is too slow. All of those different components that make up what the main issue really is.
Okay. It's a heuristic
That's part of it, but I talk about a program which I call DOIT, DOIT. The D stands for to deconstruct. That's that first phase. You take it apart. The O is the process of organizing, saying, hey, you know what? I've got things here I don't need, or it's in the wrong order or whatever. I need to organize my facility before I actually hire somebody rather than hire somebody and then I organize a facility. Then the next thing is I, which is to improve. Maybe I need to buy a better piece of equipment in order for things to happen. And then the T, which is perhaps the most important part of this whole process, this do it process, is to take action. Because a lot of times we plan things in business, but we never take action. It's like that lottery example. If you don't buy the ticket, you don't get to win. Nobody's going to say, hey, you know, if you had bought the ticket, you would have won. So a lot of times we get paralyzed by the first three components, deconstructing, organizing, improving, at least mentally improving, but we never take action. And this is a continuous loop. Just because you've taken action, you've got to continuously, over a period of time, look at the processes again, whether it be people or product development. There's different components, core of a business. And all of those things need to be looked at. And how do we create the environment in which we can attain, improve, get rid of processes that we can leverage? I'll give you an example of this is, we drive around and we see here in Austin all the improvements and all the things that are happening along the roads or whatever. Where I live in Southwest Austin, when we first moved here 8 years ago, they had not started building this big highway out to Dripping Springs. You had little facilities, farms, or whatever along the road. Well, those things, as they started building the highway, you saw those things go away, and they started building malls and supermarkets and things like that. Well, some of those things were done on the pretty much when they understood that they were starting to build the road, but a lot of that land had been bought 15 to 20 years ago. For example, HEB bought a plot of land around 15 years ago, knowing that that was the direction demographically that Austin was going to expand. So that is some degree what I call hyper leverage. They had enough money to be able to buy land, sit on it for 10 to 15 years. And then when the population and the roads came to them, they were ready to go. And instead of spending $20 million for this land, it probably cost them $200,000. That's called hyper leverage. A lot of companies in real estate will do that. They will understand that they are leveraging their money that's really cheap for something that in 10 or 15 years is going to give them gigantic multiples on their return on investment.
I think I'd like to come back to that and see if there's a way to look at marketing through that lens. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious what advice you'd have there for folks.
So in 2019, I had retired once, and it wasn't really I wanted to retire. It was sort of imposed upon me. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I'm new in town. So I said, I've had this book in me. I'm going to take a year and I'm going to write this book. And I'm going to leverage the book in order to be able to get another major consulting engagement or a job, or if not, maybe I'll go on a road tour and promote the book. So the book got published at the end of January 2020. Well, another thing happened in January 2020, a little thing called COVID.
Yeah.
And so much for being able to hyper leverage, what my book was all about. But I did end up procuring, and getting out of my first retirement because a company that I had been talking to, they had gotten a copy of the book and they said, oh, you know what, will you come and, basically help us run the company? And so I did manage to leverage the book in order to get to my next gig. So in terms of that, I may not have sold thousands of copies, but it did serve its purpose.
Yeah. As I've heard a lot of authors say, as long as the one right person reads this book, then it's a success.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's just keep rolling here. I would like to rewind back, though, and let's touch on ThinkMojo for a second. So were you their head of marketing there?
Yes, I was the head of marketing, I would call it. It was sort of like a catch-all type of position, like head of business development, marketing. Great company, two brothers that were the creative spark and the engineering component of it. And I had started consulting with them, and then at some point they said, hey, you know what, why don't you come on? I came on, I invested in the company and took over the marketing component with the intention that the company, it would help the company grow to a certain point. At that point, the company could either buy another company, continue to grow, or maybe, cash out. So getting it to some inflection point.
Gotcha.
And there were a lot of challenges because at the time there were less video marketing companies than there are now. Everybody's a video marketing company because of their phone, but they were focused mostly on animated videos and just a smattering of live action. And so how the challenge was, how do you build a brand? How do you get the word out to the marketplace? How do you show your value? And that actually then transformed into a different challenge, and that is, how do you educate your consumer base on what videos can do for them and how they should use it? So that's what led me to sort of pull out of my pocket my go-to thing in marketing at the time, which was podcasting, because I'd been podcasting from 2010, before the podcast app was even on the iPhone. Actually, even before there was an iPhone. I sort of thought a little bit that it was a tongue-in-cheek type of scenario. I was going to do an audio podcast about video. At the time, I didn't video it. I just, it was just audio, but it served its purpose. And I think the reason is because, first of all, it was an area that people were starting to get into. I mean, at the time, video maybe consumed 40, 50% of the communications that were going out. It's now maybe 70, 80, 90%, I don't know, whatever way you want to measure it. And businesses, especially business to business, were just then starting to realize that they needed videos. So the podcast hit the nerve at the right time because it could educate people. And it also put ThinkMojo ahead of its competitors because in terms of SEO, we would show up. It was before you had to pay for the first 10 or 15 slots on Google. Maybe you had to pay for the first 2 slots. Nowadays, I don't even know if you can show up organically on the first page.
So you mentioned that the resistance to, getting them well established in the market was kind of customer education. At least that's the way I interpreted it.
Yeah.
Was the podcast kind of your primary thing there? Or what did the overall strategy look like?
Well, the overall strategy was to be in as many places as we could without physically being there. And and so when I say education, it's also education of the business owner. It's the education of the marketing teams, just in general, how you go to market using video as a tool. Because the video by itself, and that's part of the challenge back then, it's still a challenge right now. A video is just a tool, it's not an end to itself. And companies that say, I'm going to invest in a video, and it could be, 10, 15, $30,000, depending on the quality and the scope of the video production. It's a lot of money. So you want to make sure you're hitting the nail on the head. And part of that is having a more global, bigger picture approach to it. So the way that I looked at all of this was the podcast was going to be my tool in order to be able to broadcast a lot of information and content. I could do on the podcast, I could do calls to action, and that led to probably around 30 to 40% of our direct leads came from the podcast itself. That's a pretty phenomenal number when you think about it. We were averaging around 3,000 unique listens each episode, and we broadcast a new episode every week. So it's not a gigantic number, but it's a very specific niche number. And I was more interested in the quality of the listeners than the quantity. You can have 1 million listens, big deal, if none of them lead to a secondary action. The other thing that I did was I made sure that we did interviews with the thought leaders and the business leaders in the marketing sector. So, I would interview the CEOs, the founders of Wistia, Vidyard, video hosting companies, things like that. We talked a lot about how to create a script, how to write a script, all of the different scenarios from soup to nuts of how to create a video program and a video marketing scenario and strategy. We talked even about thumbnail strategy. The thumbnail strategy on videos can make or break whether your $15,000 investment actually makes a return on investment or not. Something that it's almost like the title or the book cover of your book. If you have a crappy book cover, nobody may pick it up at the library or on Google. So all of those things went into the podcast. But another thing we did was there were 3 or 4 major trade conventions, associations that would meet every year. And I would make sure that we would interview before the trade show the organizers, and then we would promote it on the podcast. And then when we went to the trade show, we were like the podcasting live from the trade show. So all of these things bring and create a bigger audience. It's a little bit of guerrilla marketing, but everybody had a vested interest. If I've interviewed you as a business owner and I now put this out there, you have a vested interest because you've been interviewed to share that with your audience. Same thing with vendors. If you interview vendors, they have the same thing. So it's a matter of creating almost a snowball effect of creating an audience, a secondary and tertiary audience.
What kind of trade shows? Was this like industry?
Yeah, these were
video
industry-related trade shows, video marketing trade shows. Some of the bigger companies like Vidyard would have a private, it wouldn't necessarily be a trade show, but it would be, more like a seminar or major seminar, things like that, where they invite a lot of their main customers.
Okay. So I was actually scrolling through some of your LinkedIn posts, your LinkedIn articles from that time period. And I'm curious, like you just mentioned, the ROI is really in the execution. It's in the strategy behind the video. And that quote that from one of your posts there is that what really counts is not the creative component, but how the video is used. And this is a post about you making the kind of the hot take that high quality videos aren't worth the money. So I'm curious to taking like a really specific case study, we'll say for a Series A startup or a smaller medium business with 50 to 100 people. Walking into that meeting, what are some of the things that you would suggest for them to be sure that they're making the rubber meet the road with their videos?
Okay. Great question. Something I've asked many times. It's been asked of me many times. One of the biggest challenges in video marketing is how do you come up with a objective number that you can say, this is my return. Accountants love numbers. They don't like soft numbers. They want something that is applied to something in reality. It's still a challenge today, I think, for video marketing to come up with those type of hard and fast ROIs. There are specific cases where it's easier to do. So, for example, you have a call to action, and the call to action says, call this number and use code ABCDEFG for 20% off. Well, that's easy to identify how many people use that code in order to be able to say, hey, you know what, I got 100 people use that code, 1,000 people, 1,500 people. That's an easy one. The other ones tend to be softer, whatever. One of the things that I like to look at, a metric, is how long did somebody watch the video? Not how many times did somebody open it and then immediately close it. You know, like on YouTube, you've got 5 seconds to click the skip ad type of thing. Well, I'm more interested in second number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, not 0 to 5. So the same thing in videos. How long has somebody actually watched, let's say, a 60-second video? If they, on average, only watch 45 seconds out of 60 seconds, that may be a good metric. You know, 75% of the video they watched, but that means that only 25% got to the call to action if you put the call to action to the end. That's not necessarily that great. So I prefer, in terms of looking at ROIs, as understanding how many people actually watch more of the video. And then being proactive about then editing that video, because videos have a life, they have a lifespan. Just because you put it up there doesn't mean you can't re-edit it. And saying, I'm going to move that call to action now. If most people fell off at 45 seconds, I'm going to put a small call to action at 30 seconds, because I know that I'm going to capture, 95% of them. Those are the sort of things that you have to put into your strategy. One of the things that I do note is that people wait to the end to actually ask anything of the audience. So in a business to business environment, you've got to get that ask really early up there. The other thing is, most business to business videos now are not going to be watched with the sound on. So you've got to make sure that the lower third, you either put the subtitles, or you do something in the lower third that you can highlight specific things. Even if you don't want to put the call to action early, you can put it in the lower third, and that could run throughout. So those are part of the strategies of increasing your ROI. But still, a lot of this is going to be very soft numbers. And it really, you start from the big picture and you work down. So think of it almost like a farmer who plants a field. They've got to sow the field, turn up the dirt, fertilize it, whatever, only then plant the seeds and wait for them to grow. Video marketing is somewhat like creating the field of growth for business. It isn't necessarily going to be the one that's going to chop down the corn stalks and get the corn, but it's going to create the environment where, as a business development specialist, a salesperson, a CEO, I now have something that people have seen, have heard, they know part of my story. It's a lot easier for me to go in there and then tell the second chapter of that story, or the third chapter.
And am I correct in saying that that's kind of a top of the funnel thing then, to just that it gets people warmed up a little bit or familiar.
Right, that's a top of the funnel type of video, but there are different videos for different parts of the funnel. So
Hmm.
I would call a testimonial video a very powerful video, especially if it's done with authenticity. Not something, it doesn't even have to be done with tremendously high production values. But if you've got somebody that can come across as authentic and believable, telling the story of how this product, this service, whatever it is, or how it was to work with individuals, that goes a long way. At the end of the day, we do business with people. And I know AI is, this big thing on the side there or whatever, but at the end of the day, even with AI, we're going to interact with people. A decision is going to be made people to people. The more that you're comfortable with a person, can look them in the eye, can hear their voice, see their expressions, you're going to be more comfortable with that. And so, video is something that can break that down. So testimonial videos are further down the funnel. You can have product videos that get even further down the funnel, like, I want to sell you this pen or whatever, and here are all of the products, whatever, and you can see that, let's say, on increasingly on the internet. You can see 360 degrees, and you can see it open or whatever. You can see it in use. That's an easy one to do a call to action. You'd like this pen, dial this number or click here and buy it. So that's way down the funnel.
So you're mentioning that, the measurement of I guess I'll call them KPIs for video marketing is fluffy, and it can be. So I think that could put a forward-thinking marketer in kind of an awkward situation when they're talking to the CEO or managing budget and that kind of thing. That say they're spending tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands into creating this stuff, but they built the field, they sowed the seeds, maybe it's not sprouting yet. How do they have these conversations with the people who can't see the ROI yet?
Definitely a challenge. Everything, this is going to get to my, I have certain things that sort of set me off. But one of them, and it's probably the topic for my second book, and this is a topic of time horizons. So we tend to misunderstand the amount of time necessary for things to happen. If I plant a seed, let's go back to the seed analogy. If I plant a seed in the ground and I keep watering it for a week and it doesn't show up, should I say, I give up, you know what, this is never going to grow? The time horizon for that seed might actually be 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but you've got to do it right now. So certain things have different time horizons. And when it comes to branding and messaging, top of the funnel type of seeds or messaging have a extremely long time horizon. Sometimes it's got to continuously be added onto. The further down the funnel you go in terms of the marketing approach and the type of video, the shorter the time horizon. So let's go back to a B2C type of environment. I'm selling Christmas toys.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my time horizon is probably from August until December 25th. Actually, probably December 20th because, I'm to ship things. But I've got a very limited time horizon for my video to help market anything. So I have to be very concise. The video has to really tell the right story and have a call to action, that's appropriate. On the other hand, if I'm a business to business, again, let's stay in the toy market, I need to try to sell to Walmart. I'm a toy manufacturer. I want to sell to Walmart. Well, the time horizon for Christmas 2024 means that I had to start talking to Walmart back in 2023, maybe even earlier, about my stuff. So let's say I have a new toy and I make a video about the toy and I make a video about my toy company and what we can do. That's going to be very top of the funnel, maybe a little bit lower, if we've done business before, but that's a long-term time horizon. You will not see the ramifications, the ROI on that for maybe 2024. If that is, you were able to crack the code at Walmart and they said, yes, we want to do business with you. That's how it's The higher up you are in the funnel, the longer the time horizon, the fuzzier the ROI.
That's such a clear way of putting it. I can instantly, picture that in my head. And so do you think it would be appropriate to say, I mean, I'm kind of dealing with this situation right now that this company is just kind of dipping their toe in the water of video. It's really new, it's unexplored, it's unknown. And so maybe it would be safer to look at some more short-term tactical strategies to get them familiar with it, and then maybe top of the funnel stuff is for next year or something like that. Have you done that before with customers?
Yeah. So the word video marketing is such a big container. I mean, it you have the B2B, you have the B2C, you have consumer to consumer now. The TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Everybody is using video. I actually think that video by itself is a new language. We speak to people using video instead of, in the past, we used to speak to people on the phone, which we don't as much, but video is a language unto itself. And the way that we speak generally is in shorter sentences and shorter amounts. The beauty of video is that a small, even 5-second snippet can tell a big story, enough to get you to want to do the next step or to continue. Instead of trying to write this down in 500 words, 5 seconds is sufficient. Actually, I remember reading in the past when I was doing some work for my podcast that it took less than a second for somebody to see a visual item and really understand the gist of what it's all about. So just think about that. How many words on paper would you have to write in order to meet the same sort of thing? So if you have a customer that is just dipping their toes, not 100%, I would again work backwards. Who is the customer? How does a customer generally want to get information? What type of information do they want to get? We all have shorter and shorter attention spans, so don't give me 1,000 words, and don't give me a 2-minute video. You can make these in much shorter things. I would rather see a campaign based on 6 or 7 short 10 to 15 second videos, maybe one that can build on top of the other one, that if you wanted to at some point, you could sew them together for a much longer story. I much prefer videos that are short with a single notion. Don't put the kitchen sink in there. I don't know where that expression came from, but really we try to put too much into these things. Whereas in a normal conversation, like a text conversation, think of it, you don't put like gobs of information. It's back and forth, really short.
That's very well said, and it's something I've been guilty of for sure. And it's always part of the process in doing the pre-production for a video is that, all right, let's pick the subject for one thing. Let's talk about one subject, and then let's talk about it one point at a time. Because otherwise the message just gets lost, ultimately. If you're putting too much stuff on screen at once, people don't have multi-core brains. we only
just wait. Elon Musk, isn't he planting something in the
if you haven't seen the demos yet, the guy is already playing Civilization with his brains.
One of the things that I could sort of follow up on that, one thing that Netflix learned and other people now have learned from this, and it accelerated during the pandemic, was the whole concept of making a story into smaller and smaller chapters and creating it in such a way that we wanted to binge. So there's an arc to the story, and then, you know what? I'm leaving you hanging. And now I want the second one. I'm leaving you hanging. You can do the same thing with shorter videos. Without telling the whole story, you leave somebody, you want to know what this knob is going to do on this thing that I'm talking to you about? Well, hold on for the next one. And so it requires a lot more creative thinking and creative video making on storytelling, but it's also a way to engage your audience who's used to that type of being, manipulated, if you want to call it, by video.
Yeah, that's so true. And I find myself, I mean, I absolutely fall into the demographics or that taste. I watch a lot of YouTube, and the short bite-sized videos will draw me in more and more and more and more. And like you said, I find myself much, much more likely to binge watch 30 3-minute videos. One 90-minute video I would never watch.
Right.
But 33-minute videos, yeah, I would totally find myself clicking through those. So a lot of your work with ThinkMojo that, like you mentioned earlier, it was, 2015, 2017?
2015 to 2017, yes.
Okay. So we've had this interesting thing come on stage the last couple of years called AI, and it's changing marketing a lot. It's changing creative production a lot. What differences do you see, or what changes do you see in video marketing compared to when you were working with ThinkMojo?
Well, I think AI is a fantastic tool. It's not the destination. And as a tool, you have to learn how to use that tool the right way. At the end of the day, though, the video is a message machine. And so AI, I can see, can certainly help with a lot of the more operational, mundane, technical things. But at the end of the day, the video, we go back to the strategy. Why are you making videos? What are the objectives, the audience? I wrote something, the objective is to move the dial and prepare the battlefield, if you want to call it, for marketing, for sales, for communication with a customer. And the AI can certainly help with that in terms of scalability. This morning, I tried out a new AI online place, and I had it make a video for me. Basically, it says type in 500 words, what type of video you want to make. And it made me a 4-minute business to business video using stock video footage. And it was like, okay, that's great. I can see how I could use that in previous iterations of different businesses. That would have been a great tool to have instead of having to go to somebody else. The AI component will be something that individuals like yourself, creators like yourself, will be able to use to make your businesses better. Of course, it will compete with it, but it will force you and others to really understand your added value. What is that added value that you're doing? And the added value is going to be less and less the actual technical component and more, how do you take this thing? It's going to be much more holistic. It's, again, going back to the battlefield or planting seeds analogies, having your customers understand how these things have to work, the right messaging, making it shorter. It's not a replacement. It's an augmentation. For some things, it will definitely replace, but it also will make video more of that language because it will be a lot more immediate.
And by that language, you mean this,
the ability to use video back and forth between,
Yeah. It's more of a dialogue than
yes. That's a word. Yes.
Than like I'm imagining like a preacher, on stage.
Yeah. So think of it like this. There's really no reason in my mind for a writer to ever have writer's block anymore. If you've got writer's block, just put down 3 or 4 words, shoot it out to whatever AI that you're saying and say, hey, write me a paragraph about this, and this, and it will shoot something to you. And maybe it will be crap or whatever, but it may get you out of that writer's block. That is, you've got tools now to sort of get you out of that writer's block. I can see that AI can do the same sort of thing for video. It's going to spew something out. It's not going to be necessarily the greatest thing, but then, Joe, you can say, wow, you know what? I didn't really have the greatest idea of what to do with the story and by using video. Now, it's sort of given me some directions or whatever. I can take this from here and make it even better.
That is the way that I see a lot of creatives using the tools. Is it tends to be early on in the process, and
Hmm.
they use it for that creative ideation phase. So you said one of your frustrations is companies just lacking understanding around
Hmm.
leveraging video marketing, or they're kind of following it blindly. Was there anything else you wanted to add there that we didn't cover?
Well, one of the things, again, pet peeves, whatever. I never finished my MBA in marketing. I ended up learning it, just by being an entrepreneur. But when I looked in a couple of years ago into curriculums of MBA, I'm saying, okay, who's coming out of this in marketing? What are they learning? Are they learning video marketing tools, techniques, strategies, whatever? Are MBAs coming out? These are the future business leaders, entrepreneurs. Are they coming out with the tools and the learning based on the tools that are already existing or the future tools? I was less than impressed with the curriculum that our students are using, the next generation of marketers and business leaders. Now, hopefully that has changed, but I think that that's critically important that these tools, which are already pretty mature, are part and parcel of a program. I mean, I wouldn't even call it a graduate program. I think these things are just like website. Anybody who doesn't know how to create a website today, then shame on a university. Because no matter what field you're in, this is how we communicate with the internet. So the same thing with video. My 6-year-old grandson, he knows more about video marketing than most people. I mean, you give him my iPhone and he knows exactly what to do with it. So some things, obviously, that generation is growing up with this. The generation coming of age right now out of the universities is a whole lot more. I mean, between TikTok and Instagram, they grew up with this. You get older and older in terms of generation age, and it becomes less and less part of the DNA.
So I thought we could kind of bring it full circle, go back to your book,
Okay.
Hyperleverage, and maybe give a brief overview of what it's about. And then I was
Okay.
curious to see how you would apply the sort of philosophies and principles that you were outlining there to business development or to marketing.
Okay. So, Hyperleverage is really a book about how to set yourself up for success, both in career and also in business. They're interrelated. And, how to find the ways to unlock untapped potential. Because leverage by itself means nothing if you don't take action on it. A lot of times we say, oh, that person's got leverage. Why does he have leverage? Maybe because he's got 50 million bucks in the bank and you got zero. Well, if you don't write a check for something and buy something, I mean, check, that's being old. If you don't buy something, with that $50 million, it's just sitting in your account, then so what? A lot of people have a lot of money and they don't use it, or they don't use it wisely. So there's a lot of untapped potential there. There are 4 P's that I talk about in hyperleverage. That you can hyperleverage people. You can get more out of people than most people do in terms of human resources. Planning, performance, and the last one is progress. All of these, what I call 4 P's, I talk about in the book. And it's important to have a hyper leverage mindset that is looking at, I'm a big picture type of guy. I see a bigger canvas. Looking at that canvas, instead of being like focused like this, which at times you have to be, you sort of have to be like an accordion going in and out, in and out. But if you are always focused here, you're going to miss out on whether you're on the right playing field or not, if you can leverage the right things. You've got that $50 million, for example, and said, wow, look at that. I'm just looking at my $50 million. Well, if you look out over here and say, wow, you know what? I just read in the paper that they're going to build a factory over here in around 5 years. Well, you know what? Let's go buy some land there. I may have missed out on the first thing, but 5 years is a long time. Those are the type of things. Another way to unlock potential and hyper leverage are ourselves, our employees. Our employees have so much more capabilities than we allow them to do things. I write in the book an example of an accounting firm. they wanted to use social media, but it wasn't their big thing. So they actually asked their younger employees who grew up with social media, can you do some posting for us? And so this was something that it wasn't part of, the job description. It wasn't part of the job interview, but it tapped into an asset, a human asset capability that they already had. Those are the sort of things that as a manager, you need to look at what you've got in terms of skill set, experience, and don't always pigeonhole people in a certain way. That butts up against, the glass ceiling that we tend to put, amongst ourselves. I'm the boss and I don't want you to do better than I can. That's corporate America. I've always had the mindset that, man, if I can train somebody to do my job as well as I can, if not better, then I'm ready for the next challenge. So I'm sort of cutting off the branch that I was sitting on. But, that's because I have much more of an entrepreneurial mindset. We talked about before using this concept of a leverage prism, being able to break things down to their components. That goes back to, another analogy is that accordion, back and forth and back and forth. It's really hard to make a decision on a big thing until you can break it down into bite-sized things. It's hard to swallow the entire elephant. The end goal of hyperleverage, though, is to take action with a purpose, and not to die by analysis or paralysis by analysis. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. If you, though, put yourself in a position to be successful, you're going to have more chance of being successful than if you don't. Another example of hyperleverage, every single draft in the NFL, what are they doing? They're drafting not proven commodities. They're drafting a quarterback for here and maybe the last person in the draft. They still see the opportunity maybe in 3 or 4 years down the road that it's going to turn into something that we got for a bargain basement price. Most high profile quarterbacks, they don't pan out. The Hall of Fame quarterbacks are generally the ones that are drafted in the second, third, or fourth round. And they just wait for the number one quarterback to get injured and, that they get their chance.
That says a lot. Anything else you wanted to cover?
I think that the more we think in business, the better off we are. The less that we react and the more that we think, the better the results will be. You can't think of everything, but if all you're doing is reacting, that means you're already behind. You're losing your equilibrium. You're not able to leverage. So you really have to be thinking, and you got to be proactive. And that is the role of the CEO. The role of the CEO is not to get their hands dirty and to make sure the trains run on time. Small businesses, you're going to have to wear a lot of those hats, and you're probably going to have to be the train conductor also. But the more that you can be the one thinking about it and let somebody else, make the trains run on time, the healthier the business will be, the faster it will grow.
It's very succinctly well put, and I feel that deeply. It's a lot of how I try to spend as much time as I can. It's kind of like a glorified groping in the dark. As I'm trying to, there's a wall here. Ultimately, I have to know where all the chess pieces are on the playing board, and start to figure out the ways that we can leverage what we have to offer according to the playing field. And it is really hard to do that.
It's not easy. Very few people who have not been in business for themselves have any concept of how difficult it is to not just start a business, grow a business. Even if you come in and you parachute in, and you're, to an existing business and you got to take over. It's incredibly difficult to have to juggle all of these different things. And it's also really lonely. I found it very lonely. There are very few of my direct peers that had ever experienced anything similar. So who do you go to? You go to other business owners, and, sometimes they'll be receptive. Sometimes, they can be, but entrepreneurs can be very protective.
But it's also, the flip side of that is that it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, why else would you want to do it? Yeah.
exactly. So if somebody's listening to this and they want to get in touch with you or buy your book, or what's the best way
Okay.
for them to get
So
a hold of
the
you?
best way is, my website is joelgoobich.com, and or email joel@joelgoobich.com. There's a link there to buy the book, or just on Amazon. So actually thinking probably to come out with a second edition, since COVID sort of put a kibosh on the first edition.
Very good. I'll keep my eye out for that.
Mhm.
And did you social media or email addresses?
I usually use LinkedIn. I'm not a big Facebook, Instagram. No, LinkedIn is my social media of choice
Mhm.
generally. And field of expertise is very much business to business. So the other social media areas don't really lend themselves to the type of conversation that I want to have.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. Well, thanks so much, Joel, for coming on and chatting. Thanks so much for sharing, and yeah, maybe we can do it again.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you, Joe, so much. It's been my pleasure.
Hey, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. If you liked this episode, got value from it, or have any feedback, please leave a comment or send me a message. The best place to reach me is on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Joe Rule, or just search for Joe Rule. I'll pop up. I post clips there from the podcast and also talk about 3D animation production and storytelling for tech companies. You can also email me at howdy@raconteuranimation.com. Please subscribe to be notified about new podcast episodes if that's your thing and you'd like to learn more about marketing, creativity, and tech storytelling. Until next time, ciao ciao.